Ava was leaving her cousin's flat on a cold autumn evening. She had spent the weekend in a quieter part of London, but now, as the night deepened, she was heading back to her place in the city's council estate, an aging complex of grey high-rises on the edge of East London. It wasn't the best area, but it was home. The roads were mostly empty, and she didn't mind driving at night, even if the streets felt more isolated than usual. The headlights of her car flickered against the grim, graffiti-scarred blocks of the estate as she made her way through the darkened streets. The sound of the engine was the only noise, with no other cars in sight, and the occasional distant shout from the flats breaking the silence. Ava's phone buzzed, pulling her attention away from the road. It was a text from her friend, Emily. "Get home safe. Let me know when you're there." Ava smiled and quickly typed a reply. "Almost there, just on the A12. But as she glanced at the screen, something caught her eye in the rearview mirror. A flicker of movement, a shadow in the road behind her. She jerked her head up, expecting to see someone walking, but the figure seemed to be standing still, just a silhouette in the dark. Her heart thudded in her chest. She slammed on the brakes and swerved to avoid the figure. But when she looked back, the road was empty. No one there. Ava took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. "Just a trick of the light," she muttered to herself. She pressed the accelerator again, the car humming as she drove on. But the feeling of unease didn't fade. A few minutes later, as she neared the entrance to her estate, she glanced in the rearview mirror again. And there it was again, the same shadowy figure. But this time, it wasn't just standing in the road. It was in her back seat. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She whipped her head around, but the back seat was empty. Just her jacket and her bag. But when she looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there, sitting just behind her, its face hidden in the shadows. Her hands went clammy as she gripped the wheel. "This isn't real," she whispered, trying to convince herself. She pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching under her tires as the car came to a stop. The estate's brutalist towers loomed nearby, silent in the darkness. For a long moment, Ava just sat there, eyes locked on the rearview mirror, willing the figure to disappear. But it didn't. The man, no older than 30, was still there, unmoving. Eventually, she gathered enough courage to start the car again, her hands trembling on the wheel. She didn't dare look back into the mirror. When she finally pulled into the parking lot of her estate, she parked and sat in silence. She stared at the mirror again, half expecting to see the figure still watching her. But it was gone. She hurried inside, trying to shake off the fear that gripped her. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to get the image of the man in the back seat out of her mind. The next morning, as she stepped out to grab her things from the car, she noticed something strange. A small, crumpled piece of paper lay on the passenger seat, wedged between the door and the seat. Ava opened it slowly, her fingers shaking. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the words simple. "Thanks for the ride." Her blood ran cold. She had been alone in the car the entire time. She had locked the doors. There was no way anyone had gotten in. Ava's gaze drifted toward the high-rise flats of the council estate. The windows were dark, but the nagging feeling of being watched never left. Whoever, or whatever, had been in her back seat was still out there, somewhere in the shadows of her neighborhood.